I hate XP in the ground.
I hit my daily loss limit. My platform locked me out, and I couldn't place another trade even if I'd wanted to. Now, normally heading into the weekend, that would have hurt especially hard. I mean, I would have had all weekend to think about it, yet honestly, it may have been the best thing that happened to me all that week. If you're new to trading, you might think I'm crazy. Why celebrate a loss? Because in my 5-figure tuition days before I started this, a $500 loss didn't stop at $500. It turned into a $2,000 account blowup because I would revenge trade. And the only reason it was a $2,000 account blowup is because I only had $2,000 in the account. I would try to get back to green. I would have over leveraged my position. I would have revenge traded. You see, really, I never set my daily loss limit in the first place before. And here's why, and this is what's tricky. On a couple of occasions, I had exceeded a mental daily loss limit when I didn't opt for it to lock me out, and I actually would end up green on the day with another trade or so. Those outliers taught me bad information, and my logic then told me DLLs don't apply to me. Isn't it fascinating how we think that rules don't apply to us? Anyway, I'm currently trading a Tradeify Select Funded and Select Challenge copy traded account together. I've got a separate top XFA, and if you saw my last video, 2026, it closed early, the regular
$100 and then just popped, right? It just popped. Damn money. Every one of these is a lot of money. Okay, so now let's get back to this one here. Almost $50 practically every day, right? And then what I had to do was get to here, right there. And less than 2%, all I had to do was keep doing the same thing. Now would my mind some time, but $66. That
risk. And unless you have high probability, reversal selling 29. I think it's okay again. Exited below 29 whenever it's easier to make 13, 14 consecutive strong bear bars. It's still following that tight bull channel and it's testing support. So the downside here is probably limited. 15, you can see finding buyers near support. 15, another bull breakout signal in the direction of the major trend. It's a reasonable bar to buy. There might be sellers above 14. 13, 14, make a second leg sideways to down. But you have to choose which breakout you're going to trade in. Would you rather trade in the direction of the bigger, the more major breakout, or the minor reversal? I think it's easier to make money looking to trade in the direction of the major trend. So buying 15 is reasonable. I said if you exit below 13, if you're trading an always in management style, you have to buy again above a bull bar. So you buy again above bar 15. Small follow through bar. There might be sellers above 13 as we enter the channel
team has destroyed an inhibitor. Killing spree. Ally has been slain.
It was nothing. Really?
Triple kill. It's gonna take forever. Everything's so fast. Your team has destroyed. I'm dancing. Your inhibitor is respawning soon.
Bro, that kid would fucking love what I'm doing right now.
There's a scout 5,000 shares. The overall strength is intraday support or resistance level, ideally one that aligns on multiple time frames, something other participants clearly see as well. Ultimately, the tighter the level, the more defined your risk, and that's how you can get some nice asymmetry of risk reward.
Good morning. Can you hear me? Good morning. Yeah, Shay's sleeping too, so I'm gonna keep it on that. Are you feeling buys on ES or? You don't know? Goodness, oh my gosh, bro, what the fuck? Fucking gold, bro. See that Draco candle on the bottom? Bro, that was my fucking target already. It's so annoying. Can't catch an entry in this fucking market at all. Now I need to reevaluate my plan.
My stance is one where I've seen people benefit. I've seen data that for people with a predisposition to psychosis, the high THC can be problematic. This is just what I've seen.
Yeah.
But you sent me a note saying that, first of all, that your experience with it has been good. So I want to give you the opportunity to share that. And then some of the things that you speculate about, because I'm an open book.
Well, to give you some background, yeah, I guess cannabis is a bit like cultural. In Birmingham, where I grew up, they have a lot of Jamaicans. So, I mean, Jamaicans, they smoke cannabis, they make tea. It's just a cultural thing. It's normal for them, right? So it was about, I had a couple of friends that their dads were Jamaican. So I was smoking it anyway, but wasn't smoking it because I thought there was any particular health benefits. I was just smoking it and drinking alcohol, like hanging out. But my friends' dads who were Jamaican was like, oh, this is protects against this, and we drink tea for this, and the women take it for menstrual pain, PMS. So I kind of heard that, but I'm like, yeah, okay, whatever. And I would smoke occasionally when I was training. And when I went to live in Amsterdam for a little bit, as I said, I did a lot of reading, started reading about it. I started searching for studies, and I found there's massive, massive health benefits from THC and different cannabinoids. Some of it really counterintuitive, I guess, for people. You had Peter Attia on here, right?
Mm-hmm.
So you asked Peter, I think, what about smoking cannabis? How does that affect your lungs? And I think he was pretty much say, it's probably like the same as nicotine, tobacco, right? I think that's what he said. But he's probably not aware of a 25-year-long massive study that was done at UCLA. Dr. Donald Taskin, I think his name is. So they put these people into groups, cigarette smokers, cannabis smokers, and control group that didn't smoke anything. So after 25 years, what did they find? Cigarette group, we already know, right? Loss of lung function, increased cancers, blah, 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 yeah? In the cannabis group, and heavy, daily smoking, 25 years. I'll agree, because I've been heavily smoking every day for 30 years, right? So what was the effect on the lungs? Some negative, yes, because of the heat and the tar and everything like that. It could irritate the airways. It reduced somewhat the antioxidant layer on your airways. So statistically, you would be more susceptible to an infection, maybe bronchitis or something like that. Although, of all my friends, I don't know anyone that got it, but statistically, you would be more likely to get it. Lung function, interesting. 25 years of cannabis smoking compared to the non-smokers. There was a slight increase in lung capacity in the cannabis smokers.
I'll have to check out this study. Yep.
No cancers. Other groups got cancers, but this one don't, after 25 years. So that's the lung cancer. So maybe Peter was not privy to this information.
Well, I'll check out the study. I'm not familiar with it, but I appreciate you raising it. I wonder if it's the THC and whether or not edible forms of THC would have the same effect, or whether or not it's the
Absolutely.
smoking of cannabis. So you
know,
think it's the
you
THC?
know Rick Simpson?
I know of Rick Simpson.
RSO, you know, Rick Simpson, anyway, he made a concentrated oil from cannabis. Now they sell it in all the pharmacies called RSO, although I spoke to Rick, it's nothing to do with him. He just, because he's the guy that originally did it in Canada, and he cured hundreds of people with cancers. He made a documentary called Run from the Cure. So the guy was growing cannabis on his farm in Canada, making the oil from it, because he discovered by mistake. He had some skin cancer, and he discovered by mistake that the oil got rid of it, and he started to, anyway. He was persecuted by the authorities in Canada because he wasn't selling it. He was literally putting his money into it, growing plants and giving it away for free, right? Watch the documentary, it's very, explains it all. And he was persecuted there, and he lives in Europe now. And there's a lady at the University of Madrid, Dr. Sanchez. She has proven in a lab setting, THC, you can even get the video, the speeded up video, literally eating the cancer cells.
Oh yeah, I've seen this. I think we're finally in 2026 breaking into new ground where people are looking at psychedelics, looking at other compounds, nutrition, et cetera. I do think I'm an optimist. I like to think that in part because of discussions like this and an open-mindedness that has not existed before, that we're starting to break new ground in at least exploring things, right? Being willing to explore things. You won't be shocked to hear, but many people might be shocked to hear that the initial group that was exploring different types of breathing to achieve different brain-body states, people like Stan Graf and all those people, a lot of them were run out of universities. They thought it was, somehow it was looked at as too counterculture. Now, my lab, I'm not running a lab right now, but I still teach, but my lab has published clinical studies, right? Federally, well, in that case, privately funded, but peer-reviewed studies on breath work for anxiety control, breath work for sleep augmentation. And so to us now, like breath work sounds like the kind of like, oh, of course, right? But 20 years ago, if you said breath work, people were like, okay, where's your magic carpet? And there's the door, and let's lock you out.
You can manipulate your brain and your body with breath work.
Sure. Yeah, you can really shift your state.
And the thing with the cannabis, I've also seen it in my life. I've seen it with real people, and there's thousands of people out on the internet if you search.
Yeah, well, certainly for glaucoma, a field that I was involved in for a long time, you know, eye pressure, cannabis is a well utilized tool to relieve eye pressure, and the major cause of blindness, second to cataract only, is glaucoma due to elevated eye pressure, and cannabis reduces.
Get a lot of
that's
relief
well
with
established. And so in the ophthalmology community, they've really embraced it. I do have one question that I think is in the back of many people's minds, or should be. You were clearly, and still are, a very driven guy, although now you have this kind of
balance. I try to be balanced now.
Yeah, you have an additional. You have an on-off switch right now. Maybe it was all gas pedal before. Many people that I know who smoked a lot of weed. Some of them became very amotivated. They like.
I'll do it tomorrow.
Yeah, exactly. So you are a unique specimen in the sense that like you're super driven, right? And so I had this, dime store psychologist theory for a long time with my friends, which was, hey, if you're really driven, maybe you should do some things to relax. Maybe cannabis is right for you a little bit, but if you're lazy, I don't know if that's the right drug.
If you're lazy, you're lazy, right? Maybe it just amplifies it. There's a test you can do now. I don't know if it's here, but I did it in Spain. So we have an endocannabinoid system, right, inside your body, but it varies. So there's a swab you can do, and it gives you a report on your endocannabinoid system, right? And there was one of them is a likelihood of negative effects from 1 to 10. So the lady did my thing, and I was kidding around with her. I said, what does it say there? Do I need THC for life? Just messing about. She said, well, you're not far off. She said, look at this. The likelihood of you having negative effects from cannabis, you're on 1 out of 10. So, for instance, my wife, we've been married 12, 13 years now. Sorry, gal, if I made a mistake. She don't go anywhere near it. She feels totally paranoid if she has a little bit of cannabis. So I'm well aware of, different endocannabinoid systems maybe, or different personalities. So for some people, they will get a lot of negative effects. So you have to find out for yourself. But it's interesting that they got this test now that actually proves that your endocannabinoid system might be slightly different from mine. So I might benefit more from THC. Maybe you benefit more from CBD or a balance. So it's interesting now that we're able to get this information. And I'm very driven and I'm very disciplined. Yeah. And my wife thinks I'm hyperactive. I'm kind of quietly, look very relaxed, but I'm constantly thinking and moving. So probably for me, it's beneficial at this stage. And I'm having this discussion with my friend. Oh, it's not good and it's only for losers. I said, you like to watch that American football, don't you, on Saturday? He's like, yeah. I said, they did a survey with the NFL players and NBA players. How many of them use cannabis on a daily basis? In between 70 and 80%. So we're talking about the most elite athletes in the world, highest paid athletes. They wouldn't be doing that if it wasn't benefiting them. And they're saying it's benefiting them. But more to the point, how about the owners of these clubs? If they thought this was having a negative effect on them, they would stamp it out right away, but they don't. And these are, the basketball players are saying they smoke.
Can actually pass through fatty tissues. Now, every cell in your body, but especially neurons, have a double layer of fat on their outside. And of course, when people hear fat, they always think, ooh, fat's bad, fat's bad. Everyone, most of the world seems to want to lose fat or bodily fat. Here we're talking about the fatty membrane, the barrier around each tissue. In this case, we're talking particularly about neurons. And THC and CBD and the other components of cannabis are highly lipophilic, so they can get into essentially all cells just simply by flowing into them. They will also remain in those cells for a long time. So I know that a number of people, depending on whether or not they get tested for work or for sport or otherwise for cannabis or CBD and THC, don't take this as a strict number, but typically if one ingests CBD or THC, smokes cannabis, ingests by orally, et cetera, doesn't matter. It's going to stay in that fatty tissue and can be detected for at least as long as 80 days after ingestion. And there's a whole industry as to, how to accelerate the clearance. And it should just tell you that just losing bodily fat isn't going to eliminate it from your system, maybe partially in those fat cells, but certainly intravisceral fat and other fatty tissue that's around the brain and body is going to harbor that THC molecule and the CBD molecule for quite a long while, at least 80 days. Okay, so if someone smokes cannabis or they ingest cannabis, very rapidly gets into the bloodstream, and the components that are psychoactive get into the bloodstream and are immediately able to access neurons and other cells and start having these effects of parking at those endogenous cannabinoid receptors and impacting the signaling between neurons, which leads to the subjective effects of cannabis, including THC and CBD. So let's talk about what those different subjective effects are. Again, this is going to vary depending on whether or not people are ingesting sativa varieties of cannabis. Just to remind you, those tend to be elevated mood, alertness, talkativeness. People who take sativa varieties tend to talk a lot more than they would otherwise. Again, there are exceptions to this. Of course, there are exceptions. I'm sure there are people out there shouting, although I guess if you're the quiet people who don't talk too much, you're probably not shouting, or if you're not doing it on sativa. Joke intended, but in any event, there are exceptions, but there are also general rules. And the sativas tend to meet people sort of mood elevated, energetic, again, the sort of head high, and indica varieties tend to do the opposite, more of a sedative, relaxant, etc. Why and how would they do that? Okay, well, without going into an extensive deep dive into the different neurotransmitter systems of the brain and body, what we know for sure is that CB1 receptors are present on an enormous number of different neurons and brain structures and neural circuits, so that the sativa varieties that act as sort of a stimulant, making people feel happy, because in general they do tend to elevate mood, at least at certain dosages, talkative, tend to make people feel like they have ideas that are interesting, that they might want to share, tend to narrow their context, so tend to increase focus. This is something that's not often discussed about cannabis, but it can, especially the sativa varieties, can increase people's level of focus to particular things, something they're watching or something they're doing, or music allows them to narrow their sense of focus. That's going to occur by activation of CB1 receptors in the so-called prefrontal cortex, which is just behind the forehead. And the prefrontal cortex acts as a strong modulator of so-called limbic circuitry and other circuitry that is more stress-oriented. The way to think about the stress and limbic circuitry, such as the amygdala, which many people have heard about, is that they aren't really circuits for fear and stress. They are circuits that are constantly evaluating one's own internal state, heart rate, et cetera, and what's happening externally. And sorry to say, but the default of those systems is to detect danger, the sort of threat detection systems. And then the prefrontal cortex largely acts as a brake on those systems, sort of like the reins pulling back on a steed of horses that would otherwise just kind of take off. And so the sativa varieties tend to increase CB1 activation in the prefrontal cortex and in other circuitry that then leads to a kind of overall reduction in stress because of the way that prefrontal circuitry can reduce activation of the amygdala. Now, that, of course, does not explain why some people become very stressed and very paranoid when they smoke sativa varieties or other varieties of cannabis or ingest other varieties of cannabis. We will talk about the paranoid effect and why that occurs and who might predict that would occur to them in a little bit. But I just want to give you a sense of how this is working because, as I mentioned before, THC and or CBD are going to bind that CB1 receptor, let's say in prefrontal cortex. So neurons of prefrontal cortex is going to bind there. And then there will be a retrograde signaling back to the presynaptic neuron. And in the case of prefrontal cortex, what's happening is it's increasing transmission, increasing the release of neurotransmitter in prefrontal cortex. However, at the same time, the very same THC and CBD that was brought into the system is binding the very same type of receptors, CB1 receptors, in other brain structures, such as the amygdala, and causing retrograde signaling back to the presynaptic neurons in the amygdala, but it's quieting the activation of those neurons. So this is interesting, right? We have the same compounds, THC and or CBD, brought into the body and brain, binding the same receptors, in this case, the CB1 receptors, but depending on where those receptors are located and which brain areas we're referring to, they are either causing heightened levels of alertness and activation of systems that are designed to make you talkative and alertness and mood, et cetera, focus, or they are causing suppression of those circuitries. So we have kind of a seesaw effect here where the same compound is increasing mood and alertness and focus in the prefrontal cortex and is decreasing stress and threat detection in the amygdala. And that's one of the reasons why, especially the sativa varieties of cannabis, allow people to enter these states of focus. Some might even say flow, although I don't want to go into what flow states really are. That's for a different discussion, and it's very poorly defined as it is. And I certainly don't want to give people the impression that cannabis increases flow states, because that's not always the case, and certainly most often is not going to be the case. But the idea here is that this molecule comes into our brain and is shifting everything towards a state of focus, elevated mood, of heightened sense of importance about whatever it is that we happen to be doing. And now, of course, whatever we could happen to be doing could be writing a song, writing poetry, communicating with somebody, but it could also be something as trivial as watching cartoons or watching a movie, which is, not trivial in its own right, but in terms of thinking about the creative aspects or the creativity stimulating aspects of cannabis, not sort of productivity oriented. So narrowed focus, elevated mood, more relaxed, and yet energetic. That's the major effects of the sativa varieties, except, and this is a really big, bold-faced, triple underlined except in some individuals, depending on dosage, but also depending on pre-existing neural circuitry and propensity for anxiety, some people ingest or smoke sativa varieties, and regardless of whether or not it's a type 1, type 2, or type 3 variety, okay, regardless of the ratio between THC and CBD, people will experience intense anxiety and paranoia. Now, how do you predict who will experience intense anxiety and paranoia and who will experience intense relaxation, focus, and sense of creativity?
What'd you say, Eamon? You didn't buy it?
from ingesting or smoking a type 1, type 2, or type 3 sativa? Well, there is no way to predict that. And there's a lot of kind of what I would call street lore or dorm room lore or kind of not peer reviewed, but sort of peer discussed, I mean, among friends and people and acquaintances, lore out there that what one needs to do is simply smoke more, right? Or just ingest more. You hear that. Oh, well, listen, if it makes you paranoid, you simply need to use more. That is absolutely categorically false. Everything we know about the way that THC and CBD work is that they tend to potentiate, that is, increase the effects of these different systems at given synapses and in different areas of the brain and body. That is, if someone experiences paranoia or anxiety from a given strain of the marijuana plant or from ingesting an edible in a particular way or a particular kind of edible, that person is very likely to experience the same effect every time they ingest that strain or variety. This is part of what's led to this enormous industry. I mean, there are a number of different reasons, but this is part of what's led to this enormous industry of highly customized cannabis, where people will spend some time really seeking out the different strains of cannabis and hybrids of cannabis that work best for them and work best for them in particular contexts. I wish I could tell you that if you are a person who is, between 5'7" and 6 feet tall and you have blue eyes or brown eyes, that the sativa varieties are going to be right for you or that the sativa varieties are going to give you panic attacks. I can't do that. The only way to determine it would be to actually experience ingesting those or smoking those, which is certainly also not what I'm suggesting, right? That's up to you. I'm not telling you what to do or what not to do. But there are no good predictors. In fact, if you look in the literature, it is not at all clear that people who have a heightened level of anxiety when they do not smoke cannabis will experience cannabis as less paranoia inducing or more relaxing. That's simply not the case. Now, what we can say for sure is that general categories of effects, such as increased focus and reduced anxiety, are largely due to activation of areas like the prefrontal cortex. Now, unlike other compounds like nicotine or alcohol or neurotransmitter systems like dopamine, when we talk about the cannabinoid system, and I say effects, biological effects, psychoactive effects, I want you to keep in mind always, please, 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 keep in mind that those effects can be varied and often opposite in direction. So let's just give an example of that. I just mentioned that when people smoke or eat sativa, that it tends to lead to one specific set of, or generally leads to one specific set of effects, heightened focus, mood, etc. Whereas when they ingest or smoke indica and its components, right? Again, we're still talking about THC and CBD in varying ratios, but now indica cannabis, and you say, well, why would it improve the transition time to sleep? Or at least give people the impression that it improved the transition time to sleep. We'll talk about what indica actually does for sleep in a little bit. But indica also tends to suppress activation of the amygdala and threat detection centers in the brain, again, binding the same CB1 receptors and those retrograde signaling mechanisms I talked about before. But it also tends to shut down the hippocampus, an area of the brain associated with memory, which is why indica varieties lead to pronounced, or I should say profound, defects in short-term memory and sometimes in long-term memory as well if it's consumed over long periods of time. We'll talk about short, medium, and long-term consumption, occasional consumption going forward. So what I'd like you to take away from this component of the discussion is, first of all,
my computer's so
the
slow.
mechanism of
It's so funny because I'm actually running Claude right now to do a task for me. Yeah. What'd you say? Yeah, it's I'm currently having it open files right now to be able to do all this stuff.
Of action by which cannabis impacts the brain and body, but in particular the brain, is going to be through CB1 receptors, and those CB1 receptors can lead to either an acceleration or a brake on particular biological mechanisms, and there are going to be a constellation of different accelerations and braking of different neural systems in the brain and body, depending on whether or not people ingest sativa or indica or some hybrid strain. And perhaps most importantly, even if you didn't understand anything that I've said about the biology of these different strains and the receptors, please do understand that there is no way to predict what the effect of a given strain will be on an individual. There has been extensive exploration as to whether or not people who are so-called mellower or more anxious or any number of different personality dimensions will respond in one way or the other, but in fact, there is no way to tell. Layer on top of that the fact that dosing THC and CBD can be fairly straightforward in the form of edibles, right? Because there can be, at least if it's a controlled source, a defined number of milligrams of THC, a defined number of milligrams of CBD. That's true for ingestibles. It's much harder to gauge that from the smokable forms of cannabis, especially if those smokable forms of cannabis are obtained through sources where there isn't a lot of clear information about the total amount of THC in that product. Now, this is all changing quite a lot nowadays because of the commercialization of THC and CBD products and cannabis in a number of different areas, including in the United States. But still, many people are ingesting cannabis, THC, CBD through sources where they don't really know how much they're bringing into their system. And so whether or not someone gets incredible anxiety relief, enhanced sense of mood and focus and well-being, pain relief, et cetera, or whether or not they have full-blown panic attacks, et cetera, is very hard to predict based on dosage information alone. Now, of course, we can create broad categories, and we're going to talk about studies that create broad categories of low dose, moderate dose, and high dose, frequent use and infrequent use. But unlike alcohol, unlike nicotine, we can't really point to specificity of X amount of alcohol, grams of alcohol per week, which is safe, or X amount of alcohol, which is not safe. And so I know a lot of people out there are wondering, how often can they smoke cannabis, or how often can they eat cannabis or THC or CBD in any number of its different forms and products safely? Well, we have to really define what safely means, and we have to really acknowledge that there's a pretty loose set of controls over what one is bringing into their brain and body as they ingest THC and CBD. But even under conditions in which it's very controlled, it's very hard to predict what those effects will be. So before moving into specifics of taking cannabis or not taking cannabis, who should, who shouldn't, what the medicinal purposes are, and what some of the newer exciting data point to, I just briefly want to make a list, and I promise very briefly. I know I'm not often concise, but I do try to be thorough for your sake. I want to make a very brief list of the different brain areas that are impacted by THC and CBD and why THC and CBD have the various effects they do. When somebody smokes or ingests cannabis, doesn't matter what the THC or CBD ratio is, if they experience deficits in memory, and that's almost always present, that's going to be because of reductions in electrical activity within this brain region we call the hippocampus. Okay? Hippocampus means seahorse. It's shaped like a seahorse. Anatomists like to name things after what things look like. But hippocampus memory is reduced, in particular short-term memory. That's true regardless of whether or not one is using sativa, indica, or some hybrid. In general, the prefrontal cortex is going to be activated by the sativa varieties, which is going to increase thinking and narrowly constrain focus to some activity. And that's more commonly associated with the sativa varieties. The indica varieties, as I mentioned before, tend to lead to a suppression of activity in prefrontal cortex, believe it or not. And turn off thinking is very hard to control the mind with the mind. And I think a simple rule that people can adopt is when your mind is not where you want it to be, It's a hypnosis app where you can hear David's voice. He has a very hypnotic voice. And he walks you through, you can pick a hypnosis for sleep or for pain management. They've even got some now to improve.
15-day close bullish.
All right, let's do this. Close your eyes for me. Get comfortable. Take a deep breath in and let it out slowly. Feel your shoulders drop, your jaw loosen. You're already consistent, disciplined, hardworking. That's your foundation. Now we're just locking it in deeper. Every trade you take today, your rules are automatic. You see your setup, you execute. No hesitation, no second guessing. Emotions stay on the sidelines. Win or lose, you stay calm. You stay in your process. You're locked in, focused, in the zone. This is your day. Open your eyes whenever you're ready. You've got this.
Improve focus, prediction error. Again, we probably don't have time to get into all it's a computational analysis of what keeps things, people and animals motivated to continue to pursue. And random intermittent reinforcement is the optimal schedule.
Have you done an episode on that?
Somewhat. I did an episode on dopamine, sort of a dopamine masterclass. We got into it, but I haven't really boiled it down to a specific protocol, but it would look something like this. You're in your 90-minute learning bout or work bout of any kind. You're doing your little gap learning things. And every once in a while, you look at the clock and go, oh, I've made it 30 minutes without looking at my phone. You think, okay, that feels pretty good. Other times, you might say, you know, okay, I made it to the 45-minute mark. I'm going to go get myself a nice cup of coffee. So you have a little bit of coffee. Other times you delete the coffee and you keep working. What you're doing is you're effectively taking that goal line and you're catching little micro wins. It's sort of like a video game where you pick up little coins. I'm an old school guy. I don't play video games, but the ones I did play, like you pick up coins and
Like
give you
Pac-Man.
power. Like Pac-Man, or there was like the Super Mario Brothers thing. I'm truly old and out of it in respect to this, so forgive me. But what you're doing is you're picking up additional lives or points, but occasionally you don't take anything. It keeps you in pursuit.
Keep it guessing.
Keep it guessing. Let's say another way to do this is I suggest people avoid layering dopamine. You know, you have one dopamine system that fortunately can be activated by a lot of different things. So for instance, I love the feeling of being completely rested, going into the gym or going for a run mid-morning after a cup of coffee, hydrating well, using the bathroom, listening to my favorite music on a sunny day. But that's a lot of things layering in for dopamine. And what happens is that if that becomes your hope and expectation, fine. But if that becomes your requirement for actually having a great run or workout, you're in trouble, because the next time it's not going to be that exciting and you're not going to be that motivated. You actually won't perform as well. So this year, what I've been doing is every third or fourth workout or so, I think kind of randomly, I leave my phone in the car. I don't use any music, and I don't allow myself any kind of pre-workout stimulant. So I have to generate all the force and energy and everything I'm going to do from internal processes. And you might say, well, that's kind of masochistic. Why would you do that? It's supposed to be fun. Well, I'll tell you, the next time when you bring your headphones and you're listening to music, you feel like a god in there. Why? Because you are secreting so much more dopamine, so much more noradrenaline, so much more effective at performance. But then the next time you have to throttle it back. And so I'm excited by all the tools that are out there, all the, there's all this like cognitive enhancement stuff, and people are plugging into every device, and they're trying to figure out, do I have white noise in the background or metronomes and all that stuff. But it's good to not layer in too many things. There are other examples of this where are a little more unfortunate. Pornography is a really good example. There's a huge issue now, right? Because pornography is so much more readily available on the internet. Now let's just remove the kind of the moral judgments about it, right? Because that's not what this is about. A scientific discussion about this would say that there's an enormous availability and range of imagery that's very powerful that feeds directly into the dopamine system. And a lot of people, young people who are growing up watching a lot of intense pornography, are suffering from a lot of sexual side effects and struggles with sexual interactions in real life, because those interactions are not as intense as the things that they're seeing. The other thing that's happening, I should just mention, is that I have colleagues that work on this in psychiatry, that they are wiring their nervous systems to become aroused viewing other people having sex as opposed to them having it. And so they're running into a lot of trouble there. So what's happening is that dopamine levels are so high that real life it's like eating extremely palatable foods that are just blitzing your system, every taste bud, high salt, high sugar, high fat, to the point where it's just, and let's assume delicious. I don't generally like those kinds of foods, and then all of a sudden it's like, here's a bowl of rice or a salad. It's going to taste like garbage to you because you're at first anyway. Poor night's sleep will almost always create brain fog, if not the first day, then the second day. Brain fog could be any number of things. It could be lack of adrenaline. Some people are just not engaged enough in what they're doing. It is amazing how we can be so excited and engaged in certain things and not in others, and feel so sleepy in certain environments, and then all of a sudden we're wide awake. I've lectured to many students that feel this way about my material.
I know the feeling.
Yeah.
There's this. I won't go into the details, but there's this office in Sydney, and whenever I walk into this place, I literally feel so tired.
Yeah.
And it might just be the types of conversations that I'm usually having in this setting, and I'm not fully engaged, but something triggers me in that environment where I just feel sleepy.
Well, low oxygen turnover will definitely contribute. Leverage these dopamine systems, but look, there comes a time and place where you have to lean into effort that you simply did not choose, and that's that's part of becoming a functional adult, I think. And it's also something that Anna Lemke, when she came on my podcast, discussed. A lot of younger people these days are really focused on finding their passion, and they're waiting for something that engages them so completely that everything seems very facile, and they're just able to be forward center of mass all the time. Sometimes you have to enter things through the back door, and in order to feel really excited about something, you have to feel as if you worked through that friction. That's an accomplishment in and of itself. If you're on social media and you're scrolling and you don't even know why you're scrolling, like you don't even know what you're looking for, your dopamine system has been tapped out, and you need to take a break from it. Maybe a couple hours, maybe a couple of days. I think social media is great. I teach science on social media. I see you all the time on social media. There's a lot of great social interaction. There's a lot of opportunity to learn and see things. Some are funny, some are interesting, some are disturbing. But when you're at the point where you're engaging in something and you don't even know what the win is, but you find yourself reflexively engaging in it, your dopamine system is now plummeting. And that's a serious issue. So the other thing is that a picture is worth 1,000 words and a movie is worth 1,000 pictures. Our visual system is so tuned to watch motion and to see movies. So you're seeing movie after movie after movie after movie. What's happening is the context is switching constantly. The human brain has never been confronted with context switching at this rate. Television, went from 6 channels to 12 to 200, but This is the first time that you can walk around with your television. You can have it in your car. You can have it on the phone, on the plane. So I use social media and the internet a lot. Unlike email or reading an article online, social media is, you can scroll through 1,000 different or 100 different contexts within 5 minutes. And that's a big override for the brain. And then the rest of the world seems kind of boring. Like, you see people at dinner scrolling their phone. It's because actually the brain wants novelty. It's seeking novelty all the time. These days, I'm turning off my phone in the evenings. I'm on there a little bit, but I'm finding I'm kind of sick of the phone. And I think a lot of people are kind of hitting this point where they're like, I'll get on social media for an hour or two a day, but this is getting a little pointless.
Yeah, but you're right. It has its place, but it's nice to be able to connect how you're engaging with it, using it, and your feelings with science, because then all of a sudden you're in control.
Yeah, and I use the phone. I try and not look at my phone for the first hour that I'm up. Usually I only make it about 30 minutes while I go do my walk. I want to download whatever processing I did in sleep and write a few things down. The phone isn't sinister. It's our overuse of it that's sinister. It's like calories aren't bad. It's overindulgence in calories is bad. It's not complicated, but I think that knowing that the dopamine system is what got you started with the phone, but the reason you scroll is not for more dopamine. It's because you're seeking that big dopamine peak. It's subconscious, but that the amount of dopamine that you're getting from any individual post is tiny, 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 tiny. And then it's more about just trying to get back to baseline. So I say, when at first, any activity that's fun, you get this huge peak and then a trough, and then it comes back to baseline. But if you engage in that activity too often, the way that the dopamine system is arranged is eventually you're just engaging in that activity to just be okay. You're just fighting for normal, fighting for neutral, as I call it. And that's addiction. That's compulsive use of something in order to just feel okay. That's not pleasure. The most important thing to understand is that for most adults, so that is people about age 18 to 20 and older, daily caffeine consumption is not going to be a problem provided it does not induce anxiety, and certainly provided that it not induce anxiety or panic attacks, and provided that it does not disrupt your nighttime sleep. This is why I always recommend that if you are going to consume caffeine in any form, coffee, tea, soda, or otherwise, that you try not to ingest caffeine within the 8 and ideally within the 10 or even 12 hours prior to bedtime. And that's because the half-life of caffeine is such that even if you are able to, for instance, have a cup of coffee around 3 p.m. or 4 p.m. and then fall asleep around midnight, the architecture of the sleep that you get is going to be disrupted. For instance, it is very important that you get sufficient amounts of both slow wave deep sleep as well as rapid eye movement sleep each night. And if you consume caffeine too close to bedtime, and here I'm defining too close as anywhere from 8 to 12 hours before going to sleep, chances are you're not going to get as much rapid eye movement sleep or slow wave sleep that you would otherwise. And it is the amount of rapid eye movement sleep and slow wave sleep that together lead to whether or not you feel you had a good night's sleep in terms of your next day alertness and cognitive abilities. Now, again, some people may find that they can drink caffeine in the late afternoon, maybe even at night, and still fall asleep. But I promise you, even if you're in that category, you will sleep far better, meaning the architecture of your sleep will be better and you will feel far more rested the next day if you abstain from caffeine within the 8 to 12 hours prior to bedtime. And I should also say that none of us are perfect, myself included. I will sometimes have a cup of coffee in the late afternoon, and sometimes that will cause me to stay up a little bit later. Sometimes it won't. I don't think you want to obsess or worry too much about having some caffeine every once in a while in the late afternoon if you are still able to fall asleep, but don't make it a regular habit. Now, as far as we know, there is no drawback to consuming caffeine on a daily basis, again, provided it does not disrupt your nighttime sleep and provided that it does not induce anxiety. In fact, most of the world consumes caffeine every single day. The current estimates are that 90%, that's right, 90% of adults throughout the world consume a caffeinated beverage every single day. That's a staggeringly high number, making caffeine the most popular drug on the planet. In fact, because of the way that caffeine works, and just to remind you how it works, it effectively blocks adenosine receptors. Adenosine is a molecule that builds up in your brain and body more and more according to how long you've been awake. It makes you feel sleepy. Caffeine blocks the adenosine receptor, and then when it is dislodged from that receptor, whatever adenosine has built up and is around can then bind to the adenosine receptor and makes you feel very sleepy. That's the caffeine crash. So if 90% of the adult population of the planet Earth is consuming caffeine every day, that means 90% of the adult population of planet Earth is blocking their adenosine receptors for some portion of their daily life, and then their adenosine is binding to the vacant receptor once the caffeine has dislodged. And why are 90% of adult humans consuming caffeine every day? Well, to feel more energized, more focused, to have more both cognitive energy and physical energy. Now, of course, most people are not walking around thinking, oh, caffeine gives me more energy, more focus, etc. Most people are consuming caffeine every single day and are consuming caffeine every single day in order to feel, quote unquote, normal, to be at their baseline level of cognitive ability and physical energy.
John. Claude is fucking retarded sometimes. That shit took so long for a fucking simple task. But I'll figure it out, man. But as of right now, I don't have any trades planned. Everything looks pretty mid. Gold is a little unpredictable right now, so I'm just watching. How about you?
Energy, and so on. In fact, if you look at the data on caffeine consumption, what you'll find is that caffeine actually is a cognitive enhancer. It can improve learning and memory, it can increase physical energy, it can increase mental and physical stamina. But a feature of those studies that's not often discussed, but that was, however, discussed in the full episode on caffeine, is that studies of caffeine typically are done by taking chronic caffeine users and then having them abstain from caffeine for some period of time, usually 4 days to 2 weeks, in which time they undergo caffeine withdrawal. They do not feel well. They get foggy headed. They have less energy. There's some malaise, sometimes even some mild depression. And then what they do is they have people take caffeine and take a cognitive exam, or do some physical activity and compare their performance to what it was when they were in the withdrawal state. Another